Self-esteem comes from reading great books. Dad, probably. All right, welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right, folks, what are we talking about today? Well, before we get into that, let's get into some quick announcements. Tonight at 6:30, I will have a dad on for an evening version of Dad Talk. His name is Cameron Gaskill. He is a local real estate entrepreneur. And so we're going to talk about him being a dad in real estate, a business owner, all sorts of good stuff. So look forward to that. I'm excited to get him on. Then Sunday night, 8 p.m., I will have on Leighton Radnar for mayor. You might be like, why are you having it so late on a Sunday night? Well, that's because he's in Alaska. And as it turns out, time zones are a fickle thing. So the best way we were able to accommodate the time for both of us is to do it on a Sunday evening for me, which ends up being Sunday 4 p.m. for him. So look forward to that. That's going to be exciting. He is a libertarian running for mayor. Today, right now, we're going to talk about reading on this episode of Dad Talk, because I got a lot to say about reading. I love reading. And it's funny because when I say I love reading, as you'll find out, I don't actually do a lot of reading just purely for pleasure, which is funny because, like, wait a minute, how does that work? A lot of my reading tends to be for this podcast, researching information, but I enjoy doing it. I find that very enjoyable personally. Maybe you don't, and that's fine. But we're going to talk about, maybe you saw a headline like this. It's so boring. Gen Z parents don't like reading to their kids, and educators are worried. Educators always seem to be worried. Screen time has increasingly replaced story time, and experts warn this could lead to children falling behind. So we're going to address this. There were actually multiple articles. The one that I picked out for this particular show comes from Parents Magazine. And so let's take a look. It says, Gen Z parents don't want to read to their kids. New study shows. New research reveals Gen Z parents don't find reading to kids fun and no longer want to do it. What? You don't find it fun to read to your kids? Maybe you're doing it wrong, right? How's that song go? You didn't understand. You understood the assignment. Maybe you don't understand the assignment. Maybe that's what's going on here. So let's dig in a little bit. I'm not going to read the whole article. We'll just skip down here to the parts that I think are useful for us. The act of reading to children typically falls at the end of a very long, busy day in the life of a parent, where honestly, more than anything, you just want to get your kid to bed so that you yourself can take a breath. If you're a parent, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt that way as a non-parent, where you're just like, man, I got this book that I want to read, but I am tired? Or maybe there's anything you want to do. You're like, I want to do this, but I'm just tired. I'm just ready to go to bed. And then, of course, if you're a parent, well, that makes it all the more challenging. So, I sympathize with this. I really do. However, as a parent, you kind of don't have a lot of choices. You got to work it out. You got to figure things out. That's your job. Your kid is literally relying on you. You are their only hope. Maybe not the only hope. I mean, we've got like friends and family, grandma, uncles, and stuff like that. Maybe they go to grandma's for a Saturday afternoon, and maybe grandma can read to them. But you can't really rely on them, right? They can't rely on, a weekend, one day a week going to grandma's house to get their reading in. They can't rely on their friends necessarily wanting to read. In fact, I don't think they could rely on them at all, because I'm pretty sure that I've never seen my son go to a friend's house or have one of his friends come over and they're like, you know what? Let's just sit down and read books. So that's not going to happen. In schools, well, the reading proficiency rates are so low for reading. It's like in the 30s, I think, for reading at or above grade level proficiency by like 12th grade. Like that's so low, you cannot rely on the schools. So the kids, you're really their only hope, their only real hope. So you've got to figure things out, and it's tough. And we're going to talk about some of those things. Let's see, what else do they say in here? Let me pull this up, see if I can. You know, every time I click on this, it doesn't ever want to go. Every time. All right, let's go back to the top. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back here. All right, so we're going to go to the top, and we'll just scroll down till we get to them. I got to find it another way. Yes, I'm all these. Yeah. Oh, goodness. I started, you know, when you refresh a page, you get all the cool ads again. Okay, so let's go back down here. Okay, so we're back. Oh, goodness. Okay, there we go. I think we're a little better now. We'll skip down here to where we wanted to read. You know what? I think from now on, I'm going to have to just clip these out. That might be the easier way to do things. I was trying to be fancy, trying to pull up the link so that people could see where I got the material from, you know, trying to be honest, just like I was talking about yesterday, right? Yesterday, I was like, hey, cite your sources, be a good creator. So anyway, when parents don't read to young children, those children do not develop language skills in the same way because they are hearing less language overall. I agree. And then they go down here. The biggest piece of advice I can give as a parent, oh my goodness, did I just do something? There it is. The biggest piece of advice I can give as a parent and an educator is letting them read the silly, ridiculous books that they want to read, like Dogman and Captain Underpants, and all of the books with bathroom humor that as a parent you might find absolutely mortifying, says Slaworski. Letting them load up on the comics and graphic novels and just anything they are excited to read is the way that you're going to unlock that love of reading. I agree. And did I skip something? I thought I had 4 highlights here. Nope, we read that one. All right, so this is clearly not a functional. Okay, I don't know where that 4th highlight is. It's somewhere around here. Maybe it was at the top and I just skipped over it by happenstance. I don't know. Okay, whatever. So at any rate, there were apparently 4 highlights, and I've read 3 of them. So point being, I agree that, you know, it is important to read, to allow them to read mostly whatever they want. I mean, we gotta put some guardrails in there as parents. So let me tell you a little bit of story. Years ago, I mentored a kid that was an at-risk youth. And he told me something. He said, I hate reading. And I was like, what? You hate reading? Like, it's one thing to say, like, I'm not really a big fan of reading. You know, reading takes too long. I'd rather, like, okay. But he said he hated reading. Now, looking back on it, I think, you know, people are just kind of primed to maybe speak in exaggeration, absolutes, and all sorts of things. So I think we have to kind of filter through that. But here's the thing. What I think actually was the case was not so much that he hated reading. He probably had other things that he would prefer to do than reading. But I think what actually happened, he wasn't a good reader. And so therefore, the things that would be of interest to him as a 16-year-old boy were difficult for him to read. So I want you to think about this for a moment. If you don't learn to read, and you don't learn to read well as you're growing up, the material that's of interest to you gets harder. So if you're stuck at, like, say, a 2nd grade reading level, and you should be at a 7th grade reading level, well, are you really, like, you're going to have trouble with the 7th grade material that you might actually find interesting. So therefore, you would have to back up and start with 2nd grade reading material or whatever level you happen to be at. You follow me on this? And so I think the distance between where you are and what you would find interesting just simply grows larger and larger. So then you become an adult, you're 20 years old, and if you have a fifth grade reading level, let's just say it doesn't stagnate completely, but it's really, really slow. Well, think about material that's for a fifth grader. No 20-year-old is going to want to read that. So I think this is really part of what he was saying. Now, I don't know for sure. This is my theory, just based on the interaction with him. And at the time, I actually kind of tried to do exactly what this Parents Magazine article said, which was let them read anything. I was like, dude, read whatever. Go read a sports page, go like read Playboy. Just kidding. I didn't tell him that. I did not tell him that. Okay. But the point being, I was just like encouraging him to read whatever he found interesting. But what I didn't realize at the time was perhaps what he finds interesting is simply too far above his skill set. And so if you say reading takes up a lot of time and you are at the appropriate level of reading for your age, and you're like, I don't want to spend the time reading. Okay. Imagine how much time it's going to take if you're below where you should be reading, right? Your time that you invested is even now, is more. It's increased. And so I think we have to, as adults, we have to keep this in mind. We have to focus on, okay, reading is so absolutely important that when they're young, we probably want them to be as ahead as possible. And I think this is especially critical for boys because, what boy would rather go fishing than read a book? Many, not all of them, but many. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with wanting to go and do actual activities, like physical activities with your hands, as opposed to reading. I think that's a very natural thing for many little boys. Now, there are many boys, many men, who would rather read a book. And that's cool too. Nothing wrong with that. Now, I want to tell you a story about me. When I was young, my mother taught me to read when I was 3. She didn't know any better, right? She was just like, and I asked her, I was like, why did you teach me to read before I could even get it, before I was even in kindergarten? And she said, I thought you were supposed to know how to read when you went to kindergarten, so I had you reading. She was like, I thought you were supposed to, so I did. She taught me to read. Turns out that was a huge benefit because there was a time frame in my adolescent years where I rejected the idea of reading. I would fight. I would yell and scream about reading. I'm like, I don't want to read this book. There might have been 1 or 2 books that caught my attention and I would read, but for the most part, I was like, I don't want to read. When I got into high school, I did what many high school students do. You grab your book, you grab the paper that the teacher gave you, and the teacher has like these 10 questions, or maybe it's a school book, like a curriculum book. And you go to the end of the chapter and you look at the questions, and then you go to the beginning of the chapter and you skim through. So if the question is like, if it's a history book, and it's like, what year did this happen? You just scan through looking for numbers. And the moment you stop, you see a number, you stop, and you're like, is this the year that answers the question? Right? And then if it is, great, you're done with that question. If it's not, you scan to the next one. And then you do the same thing for each subsequent question. Right? So I never actually read the material. I just did the same thing for books. They would assign a book. They'd be like, now some books I did read, don't get me wrong. There were some novels and stuff like that where I did read, and I actually found them enjoyable. But for the most part, I gamed the system as much as I could. However, I had an advantage. I learned to read at an early age, and by luck on my part, because I didn't really do anything. You can't say I did anything intentional as an elementary student or as a little toddler or as a kid growing up. It was basically luck on my part. Now, I remember reading like Scientific American when I was a kid. Now, whether I understood much of what I was reading is another matter. But I remember like opening up and looking at it. And I think part of it was, there was pictures in there that I found interesting. And then maybe I was just like, oh, wow. And I would read something and maybe I would understand, like, I don't know, 10% of what I read. I can't recall at this point because, I'm an old now. I don't remember those kind of years. And so I think early on, I had a good foundation for reading was built into me. So therefore, when I went through this time frame where I was frequently rejecting reading, I wasn't losing ground. I mean, maybe a little bit. I mean, when I say losing ground, I mean compared to where I was supposed to be. So if you're already an advanced reader and you're ahead, and then you reject reading a bit, not entirely, but a bit, well, you're not necessarily going to, you'll lose ground from where you are. Maybe you don't stay an advanced reader, but maybe you fall back to where, you're slightly advanced or you're right on schedule, what have you, right? Or maybe you're just a wee bit behind, but nothing too terrible that can't be overcome if you kind of wanted to. Okay? And so I think luck had it out for me that I was able to get through school and still be a relatively decent reader. So then when I get older in my 30s and 40s and I start engaging in the political process, well, reading wasn't off limits for me. Now, like if you had told me when I was in high school, let's see, maybe not 11th grade. In 11th grade, I actually did a lot of writing and reading in the newspaper because that's when I started getting interested in politics and culture. And I had a newsletter that I made called Reality News. I would just clip articles from USA Today, which my mom and dad got every day. And I would clip interesting articles that I was interested in. And then I would just give commentary on them. And then I would, go down to my Tandy 1000 computer and I would print it up on my, maybe not my dot matrix. No, it wasn't my dot. It might have been a dot matrix. I can't remember. But it was we're old school now. Okay. And so I would print it up and I would take it to school and I would pass it out to my friends. They would read it and quite a few of them would reject half my ideas. Sometimes the writing class would discuss my writing. Now I'm sure that I'd never heard what they discussed, but I'm sure they probably ripped it to shreds because as a young guy, I've never been a great writer. Okay. So I had this 11th grade period where I was interested in reading. So before 11th grade, I kind of rejected it. In my junior high years, kind of my early high school years, then I kind of picked it back up when I got interested in it again. And then I jumped out of it again when I started hanging out with the wrong crowd as a senior. And then I went to the military and I just kind of ran around and was doing a lot of, unnecessary things, putting it lightly. Okay, the stories I could tell you that I got, but they were far from reading, I can tell you that much. So then scroll forward. Now I'm back into politics and culture again. What does that mean? I read a lot. Today, it's hard for me to find time to read a book because my whole day is spent doing a ton of reading. I read social media, which kind of only counts. Okay. But I do a lot of reading because I have to read what people write and then I have to digest it. Then I have to say, okay, let me make sense of this. Let me decide if I agree with this. Why do I agree with it? Why don't I agree with it? So on and so forth. Right. And then, can I make something of this for my podcast? Sometimes I have to do some research. I'll read something and I'll go, that's very interesting. I'm going to have to research because I don't know, do I agree with this or not? I'm going to have to go and look what the evidence, the facts say. So I'll do a lot of reading. I do a lot of research. I read bills now. Okay. If you had told me in 12th grade that I would grow up, have a podcast or, publicly talk about legislation, I would have laughed at you. I'd have been like, no way this guy's going to do that. But yet here I am. And I attribute all of this to two things. My mom, and then the fact that I apparently really embraced reading as a child. And I think one of the ways that we develop our children into embracing reading as a child is to read to them as often as you can and have them read and pay attention. And yeah, sometimes It's tiring. Sometimes it's like my son had to read like 12, no, I think it was like 15 books or 12 books. Yeah, it was a whole bunch of books over the summer for first grade. And now they weren't difficult. I could have read them all in one day, like, personally. But for him, they're challenging, right? And one of them I absolutely hated. It was a poetry book. And he would be like, "What's this word, Dad?" And then I'm like, I don't know. And I'd have to go look it up. And then in many cases, I found out it was just a made up word, but it looked real, So I'm like, I don't know. And the way that poetry can sometimes be is very challenging to explain to a 6-year-old. Cause I'm like, he's like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "You got me, bud." No, I mean, we worked through it. We did our best. But I absolutely hated that book. So no, it's not always fun to read, but it is necessary because that very act helps out when you're trying to build this foundation for your child. So let me tell you what it looks like on two ends, two extremes. There's the extreme of, hey, what can happen when a child really embraces reading? That's super positive and super amazing. And then also when they don't embrace it, that's super terrible. So here's this first one. Do you remember Ben Carson? He ran for president, and then I think he actually was it the first Trump administration? I think he was the housing and urban development director. So here is a video from him, or of him talking about reading as an early child. Now you might recognize that he is a pediatric neurosurgeon, and he has developed novel surgical procedures for children. Okay, so we're talking about somebody who's skilled, and there's no way he got there without reading. So I want you to hear his story. Maybe.
And, I was just this horrendous student. I didn't think I was smart. None of my classmates or teachers thought I was smart. But my mother thought I was smart. She was always encouraging me. And she really believed in education because, she worked as a domestic. And, these were beautiful homes that she cleaned. And she was always kind of saying, what is it that makes these people so successful? And she concluded that it was they read a lot. They didn't watch a lot of TV, but they read a lot. And she came home and imposed that on me and my brother. We were not happy at all.
Okay. Did you hear him? He said, my mom discovered, or felt she discovered, the secret to success was reading a lot. So she came home. He said she was a domestic, so she was, probably a house cleaner. And, and she would come home and she would say, boys, you're going to read. And Ben's telling us today, Ben, who is a pediatric neurosurgeon, or maybe was, I don't know if he's still practicing, but a pediatric neurosurgeon said, I got my start by my mom, who was a domestic, coming home and saying, you and your brother, you're going to start reading. Here's what happened.
But you had to do what your parents told you in those days. Today, we would have called social services and they would have carried her away in handcuffs. But in those days...
For saying, hey, you're going to read, what was it? It was 2 books a week, I think, or...
2 books a week from the public library and submit to her written book reports, which we didn't know she couldn't read because she was clever. She would put little highlights and marks and all over the place. But the interesting thing was
Did you hear that? So... Gen Z today, they're too tired. They've got all these excuses, right? For why they're not reading to their children. This mama couldn't read at all, so there was no way she was going to read to her children, but she still was like, reading is important. So you're going to read 2 books every week from the library, and you're going to write a book report, and you're going to give it to me. This is on top of whatever schoolwork they were given. So she's like, she imposed this rule on her children. And then the mom that couldn't read would mark it up and give it back to them. That's awesome. That is a parent who really cares. Now, let me ask you, Do you think this mom came home who couldn't read, and she probably worked, I'm assuming she worked a very long, hard day cleaning houses. Do you think she came home and she was excited to read? Do you think she thought it was fun? Or let's put it this way. Do you think she thought it was fun to engage with her children and ensure that they were reading however she could? Do you think it was fun for her to pretend she could read so that her boys would stay reading? No. No way. It had to be difficult. And I find this very interesting because a lot of young people today, they're like, you didn't have it tough like I do. Yeah. Do you know who says that? Every generation says that. I said that to my parents. I'm like, you just don't know what it's like to be in my shoes. And they're like, right. You're right, in a sense. Your parents probably didn't have the same exact struggles that you did, but they had struggles, right? My parents, they had struggles being a parent the same way that I have struggles being a parent. Like, there's all these competing things for my time. There are days where at the end of the day, I'm like, I'd rather play some Minecraft just to kind of, decompress. And I don't, because maybe I've got some other work to do, or I'm just too tired, So you're not alone, and you've never been alone in this. This is every generation. You have to do what you need to do, and you've got to muster up that energy. That's called being a parent. I read an article a long time ago that said parents are sleep deprived for the first 6 years of their kid's life. Well, my kid is 6 and I'm still sleep deprived. So I'm waiting for it to kick in and not be sleep deprived anymore. I feel like it's not coming. And I don't know. At this point, I've kind of given up. Anyway, let's listen.
Even though I didn't like it very much at first, after a while, I got to the point where I couldn't wait to get home to get into my books because it opened up a whole new world. We lived with rats and roaches and poverty.
Wait, what? Famous neurosurgeon, pediatric neurosurgeon on top of that, who developed new surgical techniques, grew up in poverty with rats. There's a conversation right there to have. And yet, his mother instilled in him the value of reading, despite the fact that she couldn't read, presumably didn't go to college, perhaps didn't even graduate high school, worked as a domestic, whatever that means. I assume it means she cleaned houses. Okay? And yet, despite his upbringing, poverty, living with, perhaps seeing a rat from time to time, mama couldn't read, he managed to grow up and become a pediatric neurosurgeon. Right? Like, and I'm going to get to the outlier argument in just a moment. Don't get me wrong. We're going to get to that. But just let's listen.
As soon as I opened the covers of those books, I was transformed to another place.
And how old are you when you're reading, when this happens?
It started in the 5th grade.
Okay.
And I started reading about scientists and surgeons and explorers and entrepreneurs. And I very rapidly came to an understanding, as my brother did, that you were the person who was going to decide where you're going to go. Nobody else got to decide that, even though there were a lot of people around us who were constantly telling us that the world was unfair, that you wouldn't be able to succeed. Why do you have these lofty dreams? But, we forgot about all of that.
So wait, so you're saying that all along there is this narrative being pushed at you from friends and relatives?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Some people think that that's a new thing. It's much more intense now because there were more people.
Okay. So the interview goes on. You can go look it up if you want. But there's a lot there. Like, I could almost do an entire episode on that 2-minute clip. The takeaway here is that reading has a fundamental power to do things, to even help you escape the circumstances that you're in. Like he tells you, I couldn't wait to get home. I cracked my book. I'm now in a different world. I'm reading about these people doing amazing things. How much do you want to bet that most of the books that he read did not have black protagonist? There's a conversation right there to have. Everybody is so worried today, I'm not getting representation. You don't need representation. You need to have dreams. You need to see that things are possible. Reading helps put that into you. I bet he probably read some fantasy novels. I'm just guessing. I don't really know, right? And so he probably was dreaming, and I'm saying this because I've read some, fantasy and science fiction where at the time, not only are the characters not representative of me, the world that they exist in is not representative of the world that I was in. And yet, you dream and you're like, I could be like that one day. How many of you men now, once upon a time, when you were a little kid, you look back and you say, I could be Superman? Does Superman anyway represent reality? No, right? And the more and more you get it in your head that you can be something. I never grew up to be Superman, obviously, right? But I grew up to be somebody's Superman. My son kind of thinks of me as Superman. I can do anything. You know how I know this? Because it's always, Dad, 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 Dad. And it's, he's got a question. What about this? How do you do this? Dad, I need help with this. Dad, my fishing pole. Dad, I can't understand this book. Dad, how come this doesn't work? Yeah, there's only one reason a kid asks you for that. They think you have the answers. Now, eventually, he'll start to learn that I don't have all the answers. And that's okay, right? But right now, I'm basically his Superman, And am I any different than many other people? Not really. I mean, as a podcast guy, I want to think of myself as, super enlightened. But at the end of the day, I put on my pants one leg at a time, just like many of you do. And Ben Carson's mom, she put on her clothes, however a woman puts on her clothes. I don't know if the analogy works quite so well, one leg at a time, but you get the point, right? And she lived in poverty. She couldn't read. And she managed to bring him along. Now, let's talk about this outlier business really quick, okay? Because I don't want to get it twisted. I'm not saying that if you read to your kids or that if you ensure that they are reading on a regular basis, that they're going to grow up and be a pediatric neurosurgeon. What I am saying is that if your child is to become a pediatric neurosurgeon, they will have to have a very strong foundation in reading. Now, they could still grow up, not be great readers, and be a functional, useful member of society that contributes. They don't, they contribute, they go to work, they begrudgingly pay their taxes because taxation is theft, right? But they're all around good people, right? They can do that without necessarily being the strongest reader. But you want to know what happens if you don't know how to read? Let me introduce you to a man named Oliver James. This video was floating around a couple of months ago, and it touched my heart. And I'm gonna play this video, and hopefully I will keep my own composure. Okay? This is a man. He's on TikTok. He's pretty popular. He's learning how to read, and he videotapes himself learning to read. He's an adult. So I want you to watch this video because this is the opposite end of the spectrum. Now, somewhere in the middle is where many people will fall, okay? So I'm giving you the extremes to show you here's the extreme positive, here's the extreme negative. And you don't get to control those. But you can influence them by helping your child to read. So let's take a look at this next video, and we'll watch Oliver James talk about and deal with the struggles of learning to read as an adult.
I'm sorry. I'm learning how to read, y'all. It's either this or I turn off the camera and just be angry.
So you may not be able to read the text at the top of his head, but it says, I'm learning and teaching myself to read. We finished Charlotte's Web. I read Charlotte's Web when I was like in elementary school. Okay? This is a full-grown man. I'm not dogging on him. It's a full-grown man, and he just finished learning as part of his learning to read process, Charlotte's Web. It's a very simple book. Every adult should be able to read this. And again, I'm not picking on the guy. I feel for the guy. And actually, I went through his TikTok and I was just really amazed. Like, this man's really putting in the effort to learn how to read. I do not know the circumstances of why he was able to grow up and not read, but super duper kudos to him for trying. So let's continue. I just wanted to give you that background.
And don't learn. Because regardless, this is why people give up. When you see an adult and they be like, why you never learn? Like, because this is what they would have to go through. I don't know if they'll go through it like me, but I'm going to tell you something. If you don't know how to read and you're an adult and you're going to start learning how to read, you will not get through this without any vulnerability, bro. Like, you don't. Ah! I'm supposed to know this! I'm supposed to know this shit already! Ah! Stay up, baby. Don't give up. Let's go, baby. Let's go. Let's go. You learning, yo. You learning how to read. You learning. That's what it is. Let's go. Let's go. And so Wilbur came home to visit beloved Manor Pal in the barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck, he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth, he held a sack of spider eggs. They're supposed to know this stuff, yo. I'm supposed to already know how to read. I'm supposed to get this. Let's go. I need it, baby. I need it all. Let's go. Let's go. You breathing. Let's read. Let's go. Let's go. His was strange homecoming. Around his neck, he had a sack spider egg. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 540 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His favorite friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see him back. I gotta heal, y'all. Like, if I don't go through this.
All right. So that's the clip that I found. I apologize that it cuts off a bit short. Do you see the struggle that you can put? Now, I want you to think about what I just said a few moments ago. My theory. My theory is that if you don't keep pace with reading material that's appropriate for your age, that gap gets larger and larger and larger. So I want you to think about something. If you've ever watched a child learn to read, they're sitting there and they're learning to read. They're trying to sound stuff out. Of course, English doesn't make it any better. And then they sound out the word. It's a little bit incorrect. And so then you got to, and they're going word by word to try to read a simple sentence, you know? So I want you to imagine what it's like for an adult to try to do that. Because a child, well, they have no shame necessarily, right? There's nothing that says, hey, you should know this already. Because they shouldn't know this. They're learning it for the first time, right? But it's still frustrating for children. And there's been times where my son is tired and he's, frustrated because he can't get it. And so we have to just, okay, we're done reading for tonight. We're not gonna push it too hard. We're done reading for tonight. You're a little tired. You've had a long day. We'll pick this up tomorrow. It's okay, little buddy, right? We've had to do that for my 5-year-old. So I can't imagine what it would be like for a full-grown man to try to go through this. And if you go through his TikTok, I think he's got somebody that's helping him, somebody that's like a professional teacher or something like that. I don't know who he's got exactly, but he's got somebody, and he's just literally recording. And he's like, look, I'm putting myself out there. And I think it's great. And you might say, why is he crying? I don't know, because He knows that you heard him. He knows he's supposed to know how to read this already. If he has a child, we all know that he should be reading or helping his child read Charlotte's Web. He's not supposed to be learning how to read at this point. He is now supposed to be at the point where he can help somebody else read, his child, right? That's where he knows this. You can't get that out of your mind. It doesn't matter how nice we are to him. He knows what's up. Now, these are two ends of the extreme. And we want to try to avoid the idea that if you don't learn how to read, you'll end up being like that guy. You might not, right? You might. I think it's still possible, not as much as maybe 40 or 50 years ago, but it's still possible to get through life without being able to read very well. Okay? I don't recommend it. And I'm going to tell you, if you, like, as the world moves ahead, the ability to be able to do that successfully gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay? That's where we are as a society. I think it's very important that we read to our kids. So when you're Gen Z and you're like, I'm just too tired, I'm sorry, that's an excuse. You have to figure it out. There are plenty of times where I've been too tired to work with my son or to go play with my son. And I have to just buck up and figure it out. That's my job as a parent, to help him, grow and learn. Now, let me tell you another story, because, I'm giving parents grief. And I know parents are, I've said this before, parents are some of the most judgmental people on the planet. But we can't come with judgment if we don't come with, solutions, answers, and maybe some of our own stories. So I'm not putting my son on blast. We're just going to talk a little bit about where he was. So he goes to school. He does his education in school. He comes home. He has homework. Sometimes he has paper homework. Sometimes he has online homework. The online homework largely is between math and reading. And so in the reading, he logs into a system, and he has to go through certain segments. So it's like you have to complete 2 segments every week. And at first, he was just flying through them for both his math and his reading. And he was getting like 100, 98%. And I'm like, all right, no need for me. He seems to be on top of this, right? Well, then I started noticing that his math was continuing to be 98, 100%, somewhere around there. And but his reading started dipping down. And it started dipping down a lot and more frequently. Like, I started noticing that he was getting like in the 90s, and I was like, this is interesting. I was like, he was. I'm like, okay, maybe it's just some tougher challenges, and he would be sitting next to me while we're, and I would just kind of peek over every now and then, and it seemed like he was doing good. So then I started noticing he was getting 80s, and then occasionally he'd get like 70s, and then every once in a while he'd get like a 67 or something like that. And I was like, what's going on here? So I'm like, we need to figure something out. So then I start paying full attention, because I'm like, how do we go from 100 to occasionally getting a 67? Something's not right here. So then I started paying attention, and I noticed that at the beginning of the segment, they would introduce like 4 or 5 words. And then they would go through this little like cartoonish way of describing or, defining the word, describing how the word is used in a sentence, and so on and so forth. And he was kind of breezing past that part because he was trying to get through his homework so he could go do other stuff. Sound familiar? Every kid ever, right? So I started noticing that he was breezing through the portion where they were building the foundation of what these words mean. So when he got to the latter part of the segment, where he had to demonstrate understanding of the words, like they would give him a sentence with a couple blanks, and they would be like, choose the correct word. And he would try to guess it. And eventually guessing caught up with him, and he was no longer able to game it. And so then he started not being successful. So I had to do 2 things. Number one, get him to slow down, right? Because he was breezing through it. I'm like, no, we're gonna. And so what might have taken previously 10, 15 minutes to get through a segment was now taking like 30 minutes with my assistance, right? I'm a busy guy. I got things to do, but my son is not where he needs to be. I reached out to the teacher, and she's like, yeah, a lot of students will game the system. That's it's unfortunately there's not much we can do about it. And that's true. Like, people game systems. That is a natural thing. But as a child, you cannot game, your learning, your education. So then I started noticing that I didn't quite like how they were always communicating the definitions and the understanding of these words. We're not going to try to get into the details, but I was just like, I don't know, that seems a little bit off. And so we would stop, and before he would get to the point where he had to demonstrate his ability to show, to understand these words, I would ask him. I'd say, do you know what this word means? Sometimes he would understand it, sometimes he wouldn't. So then when he couldn't understand it, when he was like unclear, then it was like, okay, well, we can't go back. That's a gripe I have with the system, but we can't go back to review the definitions. So then I'm like, he is now practically in the middle of this segment. He doesn't properly understand the words. If we go forward, he's guaranteed to fail. What do I do? So I'm like, well, I have to help him understand these words. Do you realize how difficult it is to explain what a word means in a way that a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old can understand it? It's a lot harder than you might imagine. But I'm like, I'm his parent. I got to figure something out, right? So what do? I grab AI. I type in, I'm like, explain this word like I'm 5. Bam. Man, those descriptions were great. And I'm like, yeah, that actually is good. So then we would look up every word through AI, explain what this means. We would read it, and then we would work on, and I would say, use it in a sentence, explain to me what it means, so on and so forth. And guess what? We started moving along. All of a sudden, his scores shot back up just from that. There is no shortage of tools out there to assist parents today. My mother taught me to read. She ran away from home when she was like 16 or 17 because she had a very bad home situation. She ended up getting her GED, didn't go to college, but she could read. And then she taught me to read. She later homeschooled my brother and my sister. My brother had dyslexia. She researched from the library because there was no internet in those days. She researched at the library, and she learned that if she took a piece of clear colored paper, not paper, but like plastic, and put it over the page, that it did something in the brain to help keep the words from bouncing about on the page. You can actually go look this up. You can buy these kind of sheets all over Amazon. Okay, this is actually a thing. Today, it's a thing you could look up and buy. My mother had to go research this at the library. This is when you had to pull the drawer open and filter through and then go and find the book in the library. Okay, she had to do it the old school way. And she managed to do this. Ben Carson's mother couldn't even read, and she managed to instill reading into him, right? There are probably many other, grandparents now, boomers, if you will. There are probably plenty of them that can tell their own stories of how they were not as equipped to help their children with their homework, and they figured it out. I was not equipped to tell my son how, I could not break it down in 5-year-old terms. Yet I figured it out. This is nothing new. If you are a parent, you have an obligation to help your child. Figure it out. And if you can't, find some other parents. Ask them. It's unacceptable if your child grows up and they cannot read, or their reading is behind where they're supposed to be. If you rely on the school, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to say it bluntly, you're a bad parent. You need to hear it. Sorry, that's the way it is. That's your child. You are their last resort. You should really be their first one. First and their last. Everybody else, the teachers, friends, family, whatever YouTube videos, Khan Academy, all that should be supplemental to you. You are their primary source for learning about the world, growing up, and being prepared to manage it. That's your job. let me go back to some articles here so that let me just point out some things for you because I think this is important for people to know. So let's go back, and then we're gonna end this up here. End this up. I can read, but I sure can't talk. Okay, so new research reveals that parents are losing the love of reading aloud. So this is kind of what initiated this whole conversation in some of these articles. New research reveals that parents are losing the love of reading aloud, with fewer than half saying reading to children is, quote, fun for me, and Gen Z parents thinking of reading as more a subject to learn than a fun thing to do. So here's some data. Fewer than half of parents of children up to 13 years old say reading aloud to children is fun for me. Okay, let me address that. Doesn't matter. Too bad. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes the books that my son and I read are kind of fun, and I kind of enjoy, what they're talking about. Sometimes they're not. Like I told you, for his school, we read this poetry book, and I hated it. But I struggled through it. And we would sit there and read it with my phone right next to me, so that every time he was like, what's that word mean? And I didn't know. I mean, sometimes I knew, but sometimes they were, the made-up words, I don't know if it's just a word I don't know or if it's actually made up. So I'd have to look it up and be like, oh, it's a made-up word, son. And then sometimes I would use the context clues to figure out, what the word probably means. And other times I would just be honest and be like, I don't know. I don't know what that word means. And we would just move on. No big deal. Because it's okay to read something and not fully understand every bit and piece of what you've read, right? As long as it's not the majority of what you read. That's not good. But if you got like one thing, I think and especially if it's poetry, and I'm not dogging on poetry. I'm just saying poetry can be a bit sophisticated. It can be a bit challenging, so that's okay. He can grow into that as long as the rest of his reading is keeping on pace. We can grow into the poetry a little bit later. Gen Z parents who grew up with technology themselves are significantly more likely than millennials or Gen X to view reading as more a subject to learn rather than a fun or enriching activity. Look, when I was in my early 20s, broadband got popular. I loved technology. I spend way too much time on the internet. Okay? Who's with me? Right? But I still find reading enjoyable. And you don't have to find it enjoyable. Find it at least valuable. At least that. Let's go on. Almost 1 in 3, 29% of children aged 5 to 13 think reading is more a subject to learn than a fun thing to do. Do you want to know where they probably get that? Oh, yeah. Fewer than half of parents of children up to 13 say reading aloud to children is fun for me. Here's something. If you don't think it's fun, keep that between you and your spouse. Fake it until your child makes it. Right? Like, I get it. Maybe it's not fun. All right? Fake it. Except for that one book, that one poetry book. You cannot fake that one. But otherwise, fake it if you have to. Your child, their takeaway should be reading is important. Maybe even fun. But it's at least important. At a bare minimum. The bare minimum is important. It's a value add. Got to do it. Should be important to them. And the way that it's important to them is when it's important to you. More than 1 in 5 boys, 22%, age 0 to 2, are rarely or never read to. Bad parenting. That's what that is. Only 29% of boys in this age group are read to daily, compared to 44% of girls, underscoring early disparities in exposure to books. Parents, you got to sit that boy down. You got to read him some books. You want some examples of books? Here, I'll give you a good example that my son loves. He loves Banana Fox. Go find Banana Fox. He loves that book. He also likes Dr. Seuss. I know that I've criticized the Reading Association of America for pulling the Dr. Seuss books. That doesn't mean they need to be pulled from your home. Go get the books. They're brightly colored. They say all these fun, weird words. Some of them are real. Some of them are not. Go read to them. Challenge yourself, parents, to see if you can read it fast without, stomping on your tongue with your teeth. That's a fun challenge. read to your boys, right? Again, later when they get older, maybe they become a plumber and they don't read, but they should be able to read so that if they don't want to be a plumber, and I'm not knocking plumbers, I'm just saying plumbing is, to my understanding, is not a job where there's a lot of reading involved. You don't, I mean, there's some, but it's not like if you're a lawyer. If you're a lawyer, if you want to be a lawyer, guess what? Reading, and then some more reading. Okay? So I'm not knocking any skill sets. I'm just saying there are some jobs for which reading is going to be much more critical than another. And if your child wants to go into being a lawyer and you've screwed them over because it wasn't fun, you failed as a parent. And I will say it all day and twice on Sunday. Last one here. The crisis in boys reading for pleasure continues from infancy to adolescence, as only 12% of 12 to 13-year-old boys read for fun. Now, I get it, okay? I get it. At 12 or 13, they probably want to go ride their bikes. They want to go fishing. They want to go do this. They want to go do that. I get it. And they may not want to read for fun. They should read some for fun, like one book a month at least, something, so that they understand that reading has value, even if they currently don't see it, even if they currently are prioritizing other activities. That's okay. I get it. Typically speaking, little girls want to read more. Little boys want to go play more. There's nothing wrong with that. What would be wrong is if you as a parent don't instill in them the importance of reading so that later in life, if they want to grow up and be a podcast bro who's doing bill reviews every Monday morning so that they can communicate to a wide audience and say, here's this bill, here's why you should support it, or here's why you shouldn't support it. If that's what they want to do, they can. If they want to grow up and be a lawyer and they need to read legislation, which can sometimes be complicated, right? They can. If they want to grow up and be a philosophy professor, man, they really got to know how to read. Okay? Or if they want to be a plumber where reading is not as intense as those other areas, well, they can do that if they want. But you should not allow your child to grow up and be limited because you were sobbing and crying inside because reading wasn't fun. Get over it. All right. What else happens? You know, our society talks a lot about college. And if you've noticed the stats lately, girls are outperforming kids or boys in college. Well, here's something you may not have seen. This is an article from The Atlantic. It was written in, 2024, so last year. The elite college students who can't read books. What? To read a book in college, it helps to have read a book in high school. This is interesting. Let's go down here. Nicholas Dames has taught Literature Humanities, Columbia University's required great books course, since 1998. He loves the job, but it has changed. Over the past decade, students have become overwhelmed by the reading. College kids have never read everything they're assigned, of course, but this feels different. Dames' students now seem bewildered by the thought of finishing multiple books a semester. His colleagues have noticed the same problem. Okay, so we're out of anecdotal territory, sort of. Okay, because he's noticing it, his colleagues are noticing it. Many students no longer arrive at college, even at highly selective elite colleges, prepared to read books. Now, if you think that was bad, just wait, it gets worse. This development puzzled Dames until one day during the fall 2022 semester when a first-year student came to his office hours to share how challenging she had found the early assignments. Lit Hume often requires students to read a book, sometimes a very long and dense one, in just a week or two. But the student told Dames that at her public high school, she had never been required to read an entire book. What did I say earlier? You, as the parent, are the primary. Everything else should be considered supplemental. You are sending your child to a school, and that school should be, I know, they have your child 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. They're instructing them. You are still the primary. Because guess what? This student got to college and said she had never been required to read an entire book in high school. I was. I had to read Of Mice and Men, which I liked. I had to read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I like that one as well. And I know there were several others. I'm drawing a blank on them at the moment because my high school years are a bit far back for me to recall, but I do recall those 2 books. So I'm 2 books ahead already of this particular student. Okay? She had been assigned excerpts, poetry, and news articles, but not a single book cover to cover. You know what the problem with that is? Poetry is great, but it's not the same as a book where you're holding an idea over time, chapter over chapter, where you might have to go back a few chapters to try to recall something, right? You know, a 300-page book, there's a lot going on in a book. There's a lot of characters. You might need to go back and say, wait a minute, did that person do this? That doesn't seem right. And you go back and you're like, oh, yeah, right? There's a lot of information to maintain in there. News articles, that's like, I don't have a problem with assigning news articles, but you are not going to get a quality reading education from reading news articles. Do you know why? Because news articles are generally written for a level under 12th grade. I don't remember exactly what level it is, but it is not a 12th grade reading level. You cannot rely on the school to ensure that they are prepared for college or the rest of the world. Okay? She had never been assigned a book cover to cover in high school. So when she got to college, she was not prepared. And you know what? I bet the parents didn't assign books either. But you know whose parent did? Ben Carson's. His mama said, you read 2 books a week and you give me a book report. She couldn't read. They didn't know that. But she made them read and do book reports. So when they got to high school, they were already familiar with the idea of doing book-to-book read or cover-to-cover reading. And when they got to college, they were definitely prepared for it because of their mama. The school, whatever they did, was supplemental. They just added. They enriched what mama was already instilling in them. She couldn't read. My mother didn't go to college. She had no specific education whatsoever to help her diagnose, much less help improve my younger brother's reading. And I remember her going to the library. We would go to the library like every couple of weeks. And she would come home with a stack of books. And then, because she was a housewife. And she could do it. I get it. She was a housewife. She didn't have to work like many of you parents, right? So I'm not expecting you to go to the library and come home with a stack of 15 books and read them from cover to cover, you know. But when she did that, I would see her reading constantly. And funny story, I would sometimes go early on before I got the clue, before I got picked, you know, before it clicked in. I would go and I would say, hey, Mom, and I would think I'd have her attention, and I would just start talking because she might be like, huh, and keep reading. And then I would tell her this long story, and then I'd be like, what do you think, Mom? And I would just stand there. She's reading. I'm like, what'd you think, Mom? And then if I was like, Mom, and she'd be like, huh, what? Did you say something? My mom was so engrossed in reading, she didn't even listen to me, right? And I say that playfully, not dogging on my mama. What do you think the takeaway for me was? And reading is important. It's so important. She didn't even listen to what I said. You know, but I walked away learning from my mom that reading was important because she did it so frequently, and I had to fight for her attention. Not always, just when she was reading. Like there was plenty of times, don't get me wrong, there were plenty of times that getting my mom's attention was super easy. Like if I did something wrong. Just kidding, I'm kidding. There were also plenty of good, positive times getting her attention was easy. But when she happened to be reading, what I learned was reading is so important that you had to fight for attention with the book. That's how you should parent, right? And if you can only read 1 book a month, 1 book every 6 months, I get it. We have crazy schedules. Our kids have crazy schedules as they're getting older. You've got to figure it out. Here's what I'm doing now, because I'm going to put myself out there, let you guys know. I'm not just beating you over the head as if I'm doing everything great. Like I said, I put a lot of energy into reading on my phone, on my laptop, on my tablet for my podcast. But I really like the idea of going back and reading books, and I want my son to see that reading books is important. So what I have started doing, and I'm stumbling right now, I started actually this week because I got frustrated that I was having trouble getting into books, like I used to, because our schedules are busy. So here's what I'm doing. I've decided that before I go to bed, I will read just a little bit, even if it's only a page, just one page, fine. And now a couple of nights this last week, I kind of was like, oh, I'm just so tired. And I made excuses to myself. And I'm like, just too tired. But the goal is, no matter how tired I am, I will crack that book open that I'm reading. And currently, I don't have it with me at the moment. It's a book on prohibition. I am reading this book, and I'm going to read one page if that's all I can muster at the end of the evening. Now, this is through the week. On the weekends, it's a little different. I have a little bit more flexibility with my time. I can sit down and read, longer, for an hour maybe or whatever. But every day, my goal is to read no less than at least one page of my book, not my son's book. That's on top of whatever I need to help him with. One page. If I can read more than that, then great. But one page, because I want to build it into my habit. And by doing that, I will teach my son by example that reading is important. And so therefore, he's 6. He will grow up thinking reading is important. I should be capable of doing it. I should probably prioritize it from time to time, especially with the schoolwork. And then when he gets older, the more of the world will be open to him. That's the goal. And I'm going to be doing that as a parent. And I will report back to you in a month or two and tell you where I am. I'm going to put it, that Liberty Lady, I know you're in the comments. Send me a message somehow and insist that I put it in a calendar or something. Okay? Because I'm going to report back to you on this. And, in a couple of months, I'll figure out a time frame, maybe 2 months or something like that. We'll come back and we'll talk about how I'm doing at this goal. Right? Because my son's at school all day. He doesn't get to see the various articles that I read. So that doesn't count in terms of influencing him. Like, he may learn about it later, but he doesn't see it. I want him to see it, so he's going to see Daddy sit down and read a book. Saturday and Sunday morning, when he comes down, he's going to see me reading my book in the morning because I don't have a podcast on those days. So I can read early in the morning, for at least 30 minutes or so. And he'll come down and he'll see it and he'll know. That's important because what your child sees you do, that's what they see is important to them. That's their takeaway. All right, let's get into some comments here. See what you guys are chatting me about. Let's see here. Go to the live chat. Boom. All right, let's see what we've got here. Yes, love me. Sometimes dreams are crushed. I was reading the wrong one, sorry. Keith says, sometimes dreams are crushed, but they never quite die. That is absolutely true. You can dream, like I dreamed about being Superman. I didn't end up becoming Superman. It's a shame. I could have done some really cool stuff. But, being an awesome dad is a pretty good second place, if you even consider it second place. I consider it actually even better. That Liberty Lady says, love me some Ben Carson. Absolutely. I think he's wonderful, regardless of what you think of his politics or, the past engagement in politics. I think his story is phenomenal. And I think it should be an example to many of us parents. Let's see. Oh, great idea, Keith. I love this. If you want a taste of what it's like to not be able to read, pick up a book in Spanish or unknown. I think he meant some other language that you don't know, and try to read it. Wow. I love it. I love it. See, I have an intelligent audience. I think sometimes they're smarter than I am, which is good. Let's see what else we got in here. That's a good idea. And I have done that. I picked up books in Indonesian and I'm like, what's this gibberish? Let's see. That Liberty Lady says, pretty soon AI avatars will be reading to kids. Let me just tell you, if you're on X, the X avatar that we keep seeing Elon post about will never be reading to my child. Just point that out. At school and at home, parents could include their children in building an AI avatar and prompting it to read to the kids if the kids help build it. That's a great idea, as long as you're an involved parent, right? And then you talk about it and you're like, what did you read? Wow, that's really cool. That's what I learned. Here's what I learned. What did you learn? That's a cool idea. And if you construct it together, kids love doing things with their parents. Do things with them. That Liberty Lady says, I particularly hated reading, but that's probably because I was a math nerd. And that's fair. And I don't think that you have to love reading. I just think that you have to keep pace with what's appropriate for your skill level, so that if by chance later on in life you want to go in a particular direction, you are not inhibited because you can't. That's it. Let's see. Keith says, my grandma was instrumental in my education. I believe it. And don't get me wrong. I'm not dogging on the idea of, family members assisting in the reading process. I'm just saying, as a parent, you should consider yourself the primary. Everybody else is supplemental. They're a benefit. They're a bonus. It's a bonus if you got a grandma, or a grandpa that reads to you. When I was a young kid, I was junior high, and I was kind of getting in trouble a lot. And the neighbor, they were older. They were in their 60s, I think, or 70s. And the neighbor guy would pay me basically to come and read to him. And his goal was just to get me more invested in the idea of reading. That was a bonus, right? That was all that. And it was funny because I'll tell you a quick story. I got in trouble for something, and he asked me the most crazy question ever, and I don't think I understood it until today. He said, "Why did you get caught?" I'm like, "What? What? What do you mean? Why did it?" Like, no adult has ever asked, "Why'd you get caught?" It was crazy, right? So yes, the people around you can be an absolute benefit, not just to reading, but just in general. So get them involved in your kid's life the best you can. Let's see. That Liberty Lady says, so we can expect a book report about prohibition. Let's put it on the calendar. We will do it. In fact, I'm actually going to, you know why I'm reading the book? Because there's been so much conversation about marijuana that and as I'm digging more into prohibition, I'm learning that a lot of the arguments today are not any different than the arguments from prohibition. So I happened to be at the library last Friday. I decided to get out of my office and go work for my job at the library. And I was just curious, and I was like, well, I'm at the library. So I looked up prohibition, and I saw a couple books, and I was like, oh, let me go look at these books really quickly. Boss, if you're watching, I know they're not, but boss, if you're watching, I really did a lot of work. But I grabbed the books, and I kind of thumbed through them. I was like, these are really good books. So I set them to the side, and I was like, I'm going to check these out. So yeah, we'll put it in the calendar. Let's see. I think that's it for today, folks. Let me check the other socials. There are no other comments. So we will head on out for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, tonight, 6:30, we're going to have Cameron Gaskill on. We're going to talk about real estate, entrepreneurship, being a businessman, and in the context of being a dad. So look forward to that. That's going to be exciting. So, but for now, we're going to head on out, and I will see you guys tonight.